Your test, dear students, begins here. What date was the Norman Conquest? 1066, well done. How about the English Reformation? That one's more complicated. When did the 100 Years' War start? Or the Great Fire of London? Yes, I'm being flippant, but isn't it funny how the minute we leave school, these dates which are drummed into us for years disappear completely. And yet, the hymns, the tunes, the words, the melodies which we sang so joyfully at school remain in our hearts and in our minds forever. It must be time, my friends, for a trip, or shall I say, a footpath down memory lane. I don't much like filming in the cold, and I certainly don't like filming in the rain, but you know, I absolutely love filming in the wind. It's so liberating to have the fresh air blasting through your hair, and you can feel it going down into your lungs. It's quite amazing. And today I'm filming just 2 miles from the centre of Salisbury, and you can tell because you can actually see the grand spire of Salisbury Cathedral over the fields there. A very imposing silhouette. But its predecessor stands to my left. You wouldn't know it though, would you? There used to be a mighty cathedral here. The Cathedral of Old Sarum. That great fortress which was really taken advantage of by William the Conqueror, who stationed so many troops here. It's worthy of an entire video in itself, and perhaps maybe I could take the harmonium up there and play some music within the contours of the ancient Cathedral of Old Sarum. Who knows? But today I'm heading to a beautiful village church. It's a church which is Grade 1 listed. Only 3 such buildings in Salisbury, the other 2 being in the centre, the cathedral and St Thomas's. Grade 1 listing means that the church is of exceptional historical value. It's the very highest level of significance for an ancient building. It sits at the very edge of the village of Stratford sub-castle, and given that huge landmark behind us, you can imagine why it would be called sub-castle. It's lovely to be here on what is quite a mild, albeit windy, morning. And so many of my videos focus on hymns which I'm sure that you know very well from your school days. Wow, the wind's picking up now. But I'd like to focus this video in particular on some children's hymns, actually. And here we are. To my right, the footpath sign and the beautiful church of St Lawrence's in Stratford sub-castle. With just bare fields and footpaths next to it. But aptly on its left is the big Stratford Manor House, and further along is the school, and you can just make out the reading room as well. It's a lovely community here on the outskirts of Salisbury. And a picture of perfection, seeing St Lawrence's from this footpath. You know how much I'd love to film a church in the sunshine for a change? Maybe next time. In fact, I think it's going to rain quite heavily this afternoon, so I can't stay too long. I don't think my cameras like it very much. On a clearer day, this would be a simply perfect approach to a wedding service, wouldn't it? You can imagine the trees with all their leaves and the flowers in full bloom. But even so, it's very peaceful today. I love how the bush on the right of the path has been carved to resemble the church. When I was 10, I probably would have giggled at the shrub carved into the likeness of the church. But I suppose I never would have had the patience to sit down and simply admire the beauty of this building, or to appreciate the many thousands of people who walked here before me. When they first came to worship here, the great spire on the horizon never existed, and the wild and desolate landscape above us was a bustling settlement. But 900 years on, Stratford Subcastle is an outpost, a suburb of the new city, but it takes on a whole new charm as a result. Over the centuries, Old Sarum fell into ruin, captured so romantically by John Constable, and yet it continued to elect members of Parliament right up to the 1830s, a so-called rotten borough whose MP represented a tiny community. Thomas Pitt took up the position in the late 1600s, buying up the manor of Stratford and Old Sarum and living right opposite the church. His fortune came from trading in East India, and he had the profits sent back as easily transportable diamonds, gaining him the nickname Diamond Pitt. He used his wealth to renovate St. Lawrence's, rebuilding the tower and providing many of the wooden furnishings inside. In case there be any doubt, he had his name carved boldly into the stonework of the tower. Coffee finished, and it's time for me to explore the place for myself. You will have just learned from VoiceOver Ben that I've just enjoyed a very pleasant coffee in the churchyard before it starts raining. An absolutely glorious old building. It's funny because the path we walked down as I was coming to this church reminds me exactly of the path I walked down when I was perhaps 9 or 10 years old at primary school, when we walked to the church for perhaps a monthly service. A church very much like this one. It's so hard to remember your school days, isn't it? Especially when you were very young. But one thing I do remember is how big everything seemed. That chancel would have been so distant and remote and mysterious. Whereas when you get older, you realise you can zoom on through everything so much quicker. Perhaps when you're a child, you don't take interest in things in the same way as well, do you? You wouldn't notice that this is a 13th or early 14th century chancel because of its archway and the blocked lancet window. You wouldn't have cared to notice how beautiful this reredos or backdrop to the altar is, and you certainly wouldn't have taken any interest in the fact that Josiah Nisbet, who died in 1781, was remembered here by Frances Nisbet, his wife, who would go on to marry the man who'd become Lord Admiral Nelson. But one thing I did really remember when I was a child was the music. I can actually remember sitting in those pews, much like these ones, as I'm sure lots of you watching could, and listening to the organ played by the schoolteacher. She didn't play the piano because it was hidden round in the corner. She was courageous enough to play the organ, despite being a pianist. If only I could remember it clearly enough to judge her playing, but I can't. However, this is a really interesting instrument. This is an organ built by J.W. Walker. the same builder as last week's at Vaughan Williams Church in Down Ampney. So you already know how a Walker organ sounds. They're really good quality instruments. JW is Joseph William. He was the chap who started the firm. He died in 1870. But he was responsible for this instrument. He built it in 1852 as a barrel organ, which means it's a bit like a player piano. It has rolls inserted into it. And when somebody grinds or pumps the instrument, the organ reads those rolls and plays the music. So you don't need a live performer, in other words. But having said that, in 1876, Joseph Williams' son, whose name was James, converted this to a normal pipe organ with a keyboard. And let's go and have a look. Very interesting then. So it's an organ that almost straddles both generations. The father created the instrument and much of the pipe work, and then the son rebuilt it and added a keyboard. That was 1876, so that makes it just 2 years after the Vaughan Williams organ was built. So I expect it will sound quite similar. Certainly the same kind of size, although much brighter. One of the best things about this organ is that you can be sat at the console and you can look behind you, or actually behind you via the mirror, all the way down to the chancel. A huge mirror, brilliant visibility up in this gallery. The gallery would have been built here about 1800, and it's where the musicians would have sat, who were then superseded by a pipe organ. Funny that a group of live musicians would be replaced by an organ which is just pumped without a performer playing it to begin with. But that's what happened in so many churches in England, particularly village churches. But this is the organ. It's quite tight up here, actually, despite having fantastic visibility. And there's a kind of embroidered cushion on top of the bench, which I don't normally like, to be honest, because they raise you up too high. That's the first problem. And secondly, you can't pivot at all. They just grip onto you. But because it's so nicely made, I'll leave it exactly where it is. Just one of the quirks of these instruments. My concerns over the cushion are actually a sideways compliment about this organ. Normally, these miniature pedal boards are just too small to manage, and it's easier just to play with your hands alone, as my old primary school teacher did. But this pedal board is perfectly playable, because it's slightly larger and well lit, so a wooden seat surface would have been more handy. The pedal board is here simply to relieve the organist's left hand. Take, for instance, this hymn, probably the best known children's hymn of all time. I can play it with my hands alone, but when things get busy in the second half, it's difficult to manage all those passing notes between the fingers. Instead, I'll play the bass line with my feet for those sections, allowing me to negotiate those inner parts much more smoothly with my hands. All things bright and beautiful, one of the most cheerful, innocent, and upbeat hymns of all time. I don't mean to spoil its loveliness, but when Cecil Frances Alexander wrote the words back in 1848, she intended them for children, and yet nearly 180 years later, it's become one of the most popular hymns for funerals. I imagine William Henry Monk, who wrote the music, would be just as baffled, and I'm sure he'd point me in the direction of his much more sombre tune for Abide With Me. But in my experience, the brighter tune is still sung more often, and perhaps that's because we love the hymns most, which we remember from our school days. And what's more, they're beautifully singable too. The stops you heard here were various combinations of open diapason, principal, and 15th. Each one is brighter than the last, producing an effect called a chorus, which helps the organ project to the front of the church. The big advantage here at St. Lawrence's over the organ at Down Ampney last week is that this one speaks directly to the congregation, right over their heads, rather than sideways through a chancel arch. Another big problem at Down Ampney was the huge rood screen, which partially blocked out the sound. And I didn't mention then that Vaughan Williams absolutely hated it. But here at St. Lawrence's, I'm free to test out the quieter sounds, knowing they'll be heard clearly in the church. Listen out for the stopped diapason, which sounds a bit like a recorder, and also the dulciana, which means sweet, a stringy, angelic sound. peace and gentle recollections at St. Lawrence's Church in Stratford, Subcastle. That was just a tiny glimpse of some childhood hymns, and yet almost all of the videos I've produced probably conjure up memories of your school days. Almost all of those hymns we remember well. In fact, the top comment on last week's video from Down Ampney, and comments are kind of arranged by popularity. It depends how many people click on the like button on that comment, which determines which one goes to the top. The top comment simply said this: how blessed we were as children to sing these timeless hymns at school and church. Now in old age, they are a joy and a support. Well, that's an utterly beautiful statement, so thank you so much. When you're watching these videos, the least you could do, please, is to click on that subscribe button underneath the video. It's a completely free way of supporting me, and it really helps push my work and these wonderful buildings to a wider audience. If you watch my videos on the television, you might have to find your phone or a tablet like an iPad. Search the Salisbury Organist on YouTube and just click on the subscribe button. And if you click on the bell next to it, then you're kind of notified every time one of my new videos comes out. So it makes sure that you are part of the Salisbury Organist family, and it doesn't cost a penny. If you'd like to help me more, I would be truly, truly grateful. I cover so many miles on this channel. And if you'd like to help me, just head to my PayPal link. If you look underneath the screen, you'll see the link there, which takes you to the Salisbury Organist donations page. And from there, you can leave a small donation if you're enjoying these weekly videos. And I would be super, super grateful for your help. It's really crucial in helping keep me on the road and filming these trips for you. And I hope these hymns and tunes make you feel happy and cheerful as they do for me. Thank you so much for your support. I truly appreciate it. 2 weeks ago, I delivered a very special message on this channel. I'm sure you remember, and I know you remember because lots of you have got in touch with me asking for the outcome. Remember back in the Cotswolds, those beautiful churches? Well, at the end of that video, I was given quite a difficult task actually, of reading a very personal message from one of my viewers in California, whose name is Tony, to his partner, who incidentally was sat on the same sofa watching my video at that time. And I'm sure you can remember this message was a very delicately written proposal from Tony to Linda. And so many of you have been asking me for the outcome. So of course, I must oblige, and I'm very glad to do that, with a message written by Tony himself. And it says this: Mr. Mayton, given the ubiquitous nature of the internet, the comments expressed on your channel showed us how even something quite personal can be felt and appreciated by others from around the world. Sitting alone in our living room with 18,000 other people looking on was both a daunting and humbling experience. Being able to share our event with so many others reminds us how your channel can compress the world and connect people that might otherwise never meet. I completely agree. Think of all of those hymns we've heard, which I'm sure all of you can relate to. And I hope that you all feel part of my journeys. That's the beauty of filming the way I do. I love it. And thank you, Tony, for saying that. Now I'm just prolonging the ending here, aren't I? Thank you, Sir Ben, for providing the perfect backdrop for my marriage proposal. In case you were wondering, Linda did say yes. And I'm not sure if I could have done it without you. Tony, Well, it's my great privilege, Tony. I'm very proud to have been able to be part of your lives in that way. Fantastic. You know, that makes me feel very happy indeed. The best way to end is always with music, and I think I have the perfect choice. Back in 1228, it's a history lesson again, isn't it? No. Back in 1228, St. Lawrence's Church in Stratford Subcastle was a chapelry under the care of none other than my beloved St. Martin's Church in Salisbury. All the way back in 1228, those two buildings were connected. So we've got to end at St. Martin's. And how about a hymn which all of us, I'm sure, remember from school? It's called This Little Light of Mine. And it seems the perfect way to end on a jolly note. And I say unto you, until next time, my friends, have a great week. Cheerio.